I've played tons of games, many of them I either emulate or I own on physical hardware, but that can get expensive. What if there existed opportunities to own multiple games in one tiny little collection? That's what a compilation is, and I'm a huge fan of them. Usually I wouldn't talk about something like this, but Crazy John 8012 brought it up, so I figured why not? That's the topic of today's episode, 10 of my favorite compilations out there. Bear in mind, I'm only going to talk about the ones that I personally own or that I personally recommend from my childhood. Hopefully I can save you some money or maybe make your gaming experience a little bit more efficient. Let's begin. Devil May Cry was always a game that I saw growing up, but it never interested me. I had heard that it was tough and I was notoriously not into games that caused me to invest time and energy. I'm a kid of the ADHD era. A game has exactly 10 minutes to catch my attention or else I'm watching Cartoon Network. That's how it was. At some point, I believe I was stationed in Alaska. I was big on going to the GameStop up there because importing anything through eBay was a chore. It took an act of Congress just to get people to ship to Alaska, so my ability to get classic games from systems I loved, that wasn't feasible in the slightest. So instead, when I went to GameStop, I noticed the Devil May Cry HD collection, which was released for the PS3 and Xbox 360 initially in 2012, with a secondary release for the PC, Xbox One, and PS4 in 2018. The compilation contains Devil May Cry 2, and Devil May Cry 3 Dante's Awakening Special Edition, which is important because the original version of Devil May Cry 3 was a testament to the sins of mankind. It's one of those moments in gaming history where Japan pulled an oopsie daisy when it came to the difficulty. We got the Japanese easy mode, which is American skull-fuckingly hard, right? While I do suggest this compilation, it isn't without its flaws. There's some graphical issues, some audio issues. The music does go on the fritz sometimes, so if that's something that you care about, it might be better to get the 2018 re-release because many of those issues were fixed. I paid about $10 for it, but the total cost of the games if you were to buy them individually would be around $25 on a good day. These games are quite accessible, and they really aren't that expensive. I'm a huge fan of Kojima's Metal Gear line of games. I just find that his artistic direction allows us to really feel invested in the bullshit of the stuff that happens within his universe. As a kid, I bought a collection known as the Essentials Collection, which is one that I do suggest you pick up. So honorable mention to that. It's the first 3 Metal Gear Solid games, but Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 are the more definitive versions, Substance and Subsistence. Let's break it down real quick. Metal Gear Solid was an epic-ass game that still stands the test of time today. Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance is an upgrade of Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty that contains 500 extra standalone missions, a boss survival mode, skateboarding, a casting theater, and the infamous Snake Tales, where Kojima really wanted people to like Raiden, but they didn't. So Snake Tales kind of acts as a series of stories involving Snake in the environment that we're playing in, Big Shell. The final game is Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence, and this is the one that got kind of affected in some ways. The original Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater was epic, one of my favorite games on the PS2, hands down, but Subsistence, the real release of it, had an extra disc, Persistence, which had a game we had never seen before, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. If you bought the limited edition, you could even get a third disc, Existence, which was just a 3.5-hour cut of the cinematics of the game with remastered sound. But the quirky thing about the Essentials collection is that it omits the Persistence and the Existence discs, so you only get the benefits of Subsistence from the ground level. The Essentials collection cost me $20 when I bought it, but it was on sale. Nowadays, you're looking at about $60. The games individually are roughly $80, so if you want a little bit of a discount, the Essentials collection is awesome. But with all of that talk of Metal Gear Solid, there's one compilation that I find knocks the rest out of the water. Metal Gear Solid The Legacy Collection on PS3. This is an exclusive, and when I bought it, it was used from GameStop, again when I was stationed in Alaska. I think I paid $25 for it, but it's a $40+ game nowadays. On this compilation alone, we have Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 on the MSX2, Metal Gear Solid VR missions, Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots, and Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, which was originally on the PSP. The first 2 games alone are worth the entire collection. Collecting MSX2 games can become expensive quickly. Metal Gear 1 alone usually goes for about $250 to $300, and Metal Gear 2 is usually around $320 loose. With that in mind, the rest of the games individually, they really aren't that expensive, but the value of this compilation is just shy of $700. And when push comes to shove, I would very much rather spend that money on tons of different games versus 8 games. This compilation is great, and if you happen to see it, it's worth nabbing. Metroid is a series that I'm not overly fond of. In fact, my first experience with the franchise was Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, and the only reason I did was because it was one of the few Wii games that remained at Blockbuster when you could tell that they were starting to fade away. Much later down the road, I would play Metroid on the NES and learn quickly that the Metroidvania or platforming action genre wasn't for me. I didn't like endlessly walking hallways without a point of reference outside of the environment that I'm in, and I don't like having to use a map of my own creation for a 2D game, but that's just my own individual shortcoming. I recognize how important Metroid is and how fun it could be to some people, but it's not for me. That being said, the one collection I love but never managed to physically own was the Metroid Prime trilogy, which unfortunately is more expensive than it was when it came out. Now it's an $80 game. It comes with all 3 of the Metroid Prime titles, which together comes up to about $75. Out of the 3, the most expensive is Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. So if there was a compilation that might be divisive, it would probably be this one. I know some people enjoy the GameCube controls and kind of shied away from the Wii motion controls, but if you like the Wii motion controls, this is the compilation that you want. Growing up, I did not own an Xbox. I had friends that did, so my first experience with online multiplayer came from coming home from high school, kissing my mom on the cheek, and immediately getting in my car and driving away to my friend's house to play Modern Warfare, World of Warcraft, or Halo 3. It really depended on what we wanted to play, and if there was alcohol involved, I was already there. If we fast forward, I bought a 360 from one of my coworkers, but I couldn't get into Halo. I felt that something was off, and I ended up selling my 360 before I was PCS to South Korea. Obviously, as time went on, Halo was one of the franchises that my Twitch community really wanted to see, so I played them. And this time around, I really didn't mind them. It also helped that I was playing it with a peer the whole time, my former lead moderator, Lord Knight Calebcom. But the method by which we played it was the Halo Master Chief Collection. Now, originally, this game only had the first 4 entries of Halo, but as time went on, they kept adding more stuff. As of 2020, we have Halo 3 ODST and Halo Reach. So all in all, we have 6 games, 2 of which are remastered, Halo 1 and 2. Now it does have some issues, but if you can look past that, it's well worth the money. I personally bought the PC version for $40, but if you were to buy all of these games, not including the remaster of Halo 2, you'd pay about $48, so it really boils down if you want the individual games with servers that no longer work, or all of them in one collection where you can play the multiplayers from the original games. Mass Effect is one of my favorite franchises. I love the idea of space exploration, meeting other races, and having the agency of choice, the ability to choose what I want to say, and to foster emotional connections in games with the characters that I encounter. I've always been big on that, and BioWare was big on that too, so I love their games. Along the line, I've bought every single game in the franchise, even Andromeda, which I don't understand why people poop on Andromeda. Sure, it doesn't have Shepard, but I didn't mind it one bit. But if you want to have all 3 games in one sitting, then you'll want to get Mass Effect Legendary Edition. It has all 3 of the original games, but they are all remastered. They have tremendous technical improvements, balance in the gameplay, which is one thing that people often complained about with the original Mass Effect. This fixes so many things, and it includes almost all of the DLC. I say almost because the source code for the second DLC of Mass Effect 1, Pinnacle Station, was unfortunately lost. But if you really want to look into it, modders have been able to bring it back, so if that's something you care about, it might be worth looking into. This collection costs about 60 bucks, but to own the games individually, it's still cheaper. I think for about 15 bucks, you can probably snag all of them for the 360, or less if you wanted to get the PS3 versions. To me, I like the idea of a fresh coat of paint on a great franchise, so it's up to you if you want it. There was a trifecta of goodness when it came to platforming games on the PS2, Jak and Daxter, Ratchet & Clank, and Sly Cooper. All three of these franchises single-handedly carried the PS2 era of platforming, and they're guilty of tropes and crimes that existed in the previous generation. But if you're a kid like me, you didn't care. To me, Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus is one of the best games on the PS2, and while I'm not a huge fan of where the franchise went after the first game, I was curious to see how it panned out. So I bought the games individually, and one day saw the Sly Cooper HD collection. You'll see often that the three franchises I just brought up are remastered and available. Even Idle Minds put out a compilation for Ratchet & Clank, and I believe I paid somewhere in the neighborhood of $35 for it, and it contains the first three games in the franchise: Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, Sly 2 Band of Thieves, and Sly 3 Honor Among Thieves. For many of us, we loved this because it was epic, the games were epic, and we were so unsure if Sucker Punch was ever going to release a fourth game in the franchise. And guess what? They did in 2013, which blew everyone away. I don't think we expected to see it, I know I didn't. If you want to collect these games individually, you'll likely pay about 45 bucks, so just get the remaster. The second half of the trifecta of platforming on the PS2, Jak and Daxter is one of those franchises you either love or you'll hate. For me, it's like right on the cusp of the naughty boy list. I remember renting the Precursor Legacy as a kid and loving it. For a long time, I didn't play the sequels. I didn't play Jak 2 or Jak 3 because I didn't care. The era of collectathons was coming to an end, and I didn't find an interest in keeping that bullshit alive. As my Twitch career pushed forward, I played Jak 2, and I fucking hated it, and dealt with Jak 3 long enough to beat it. And even though I own all the games by themselves, I did buy the Jak and Daxter HD collection, which had all of these games remastered in HD. Love to see it. We have a 720 resolution at 60 frames per second, which if you're into that, cool. I don't give a fuck, but hey, it's fun. I bought this for $10 at GameStop used, but you're more likely to pay about 20 bucks for it now. You'd probably shell out 26 to get all of them individually, so again, this is a case of buying what you want. I do enjoy the graphical updates, but the older ones still stand up in terms of replayability, except for Jak 2. Fuck that game. Growing up, Street Fighter was one of my favorite games, and in many ways, it's still one of my favorite fighting games. I did not own a Super Nintendo, but my cousin did, and the only chance I had to play Street Fighter was at his house, and I only went there during the summer. As he got older, I got less cooler in his eyes, and yeah, he traded in his Super Nintendo for a PS1, and I never really got a chance to play with him anymore. That being said, when I was older, I played Street Fighter 3, courtesy of the Street Fighter Anniversary Collection, which was made to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the franchise. It had Street Fighter 3 and all of its melt-to-dust variances of Street Fighter 2, which was awesome. But it's been 15 years since that, and now we have an epic collection on modern consoles known as the Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection, chocked to the brim with the arcade iterations of every Street Fighter that predated Street Fighter 4. That means that on this disc, we had the original bullshit game Street Fighter, 5 variances of Street Fighter 2 with an optional extra if you had the Switch port, all 3 iterations of Street Fighter Alpha, and all 3 versions of Street Fighter 3 for a grand total of 13 different fighting games. I mean, technically, push comes to shove, it's really 4 games, but Capcom's not ready to stop re-releasing their previous ideas. It's true. These are direct arcade ports, so if you do manage to buy this, think of all the coins you'd be saving to have the opportunity to play this. My kids love it, and it's approachable because they can choose which version they want to play. My older kids like Street Fighter 3, Arya likes Street Fighter 2, I like Alpha, and we're all different, and that replayability is worth its weight in gold. Now, for franchise purists, there are some omissions. Hyper Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold, and Alpha 3 Upper are not included, But if you want hyper, you can buy the 15th Anniversary Collection, and for the full Alpha experience, you can buy the Street Fighter Alpha Anthology, both of which are on the PS2. There are a fucking stupid amount of Mega Man compilations out there. I could probably make an entire video talking only about them. And while I did mention them in the Ready Go Gaming Show entry all about the Mega Man franchise, to me it's the same thing repeated over and over and over again. The same grouping of games, just re-released for different systems, with different cohorts, different audiences. So the one that I personally cared to get was the Mega Man Anniversary Collection. My next Mega Man is Mega Man 7, which is a pretty expensive Super Nintendo game. On average, it costs about $250 loose, which is fucking stupid. But hey, that's the worth. I don't make the rules. I wanted something I could play on my PS2, and that was this game. It has Mega Man 1 through 8 with remixed sound, as well as the two arcade games, the Power Battle and the Power Fighters, which if you haven't checked them out, they are pretty cool in their own way. Now I paid about 20 bucks for this collection, which is slightly on the higher end, but you're getting about $650 worth of games if you were buying them by themselves. So these compilations, as redundant as they might seem, do assist in preserving their part of video gaming history. So mad props to them, but I don't need 15 other versions of the same thing. No thank you. Final Fantasy is a lovely franchise. I've actually played all of them up to Final Fantasy IX, and each of those games have their own strength and their own weaknesses. We were able to see how certain elements were added or removed and how the series has evolved to compete with other JRPGs of the era. There are countless compilations out there: Final Fantasy 1 and 2, Final Fantasy Collection, Final Fantasy Anthology, Final Fantasy Chronicles, but the one that was important to me was Final Fantasy Origins, because it was basically the PlayStation ports of Final Fantasy and Final Fantasy II, which if you know anything about the series, Final Fantasy II was not released in America. By the time we were ready to work on Final Fantasy II in America, Final Fantasy IV had already been released. So our version of Final Fantasy II on the Super Nintendo was really Final Fantasy IV. Final Fantasy Origins is a beautiful and wonderful game. The whole principle of it is based on the Wonder Swan color version, the handheld, with a remixed soundtrack, art galleries, a better save function, and FMV sequences, which are always nice. I know some people complain about the slowdowns with the PS1 era Final Fantasy ports of previous games, but I don't mind. You get used to it. Final Fantasy Origins is about $18, and I personally own the Greatest Hits version, so that's about $16. The original Wonder Swan color versions go for $75 if combined, so to me this is the best way to enjoy those games. Unless you're into the pixel remasters, which I've heard great things about, but I do want to play these games on the older systems. It just makes sense to me. And that's it for today's episode. What did you think of this list? What compilations do you suggest to the community? Who knows, maybe you'll save someone some money. Speaking of our community, if you made it to the end of this episode, you're already home in our community. We're a gathering of retro gaming enthusiasts who love remembering a time when life was just a little bit easier to live. And if you align with that, you'll fit right in, so feel free to subscribe. Finally, the single most important thing you could do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly aligns with the visibility of the projects and the videos that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes. Fortefyre out.